Phillips has pledged to get tough with aggressive charity fundraisers to stop them taking advantage of vulnerable people. Some more British holidaymakers are expected to fly home from Tunisia today after the government urged them to leave the country following fears of another terror attack. Extra flights have been laid on this weekend to evacuate more than 3,000 British travellers believed to be in the country. Let's talk about this now. We're joined from Brighouse in West Yorkshire by Geoff Hann, Director of Hinterland Travel, which operates tours to both Afghanistan and Iraq. And joining me in the studio is Adrian Phillips, who's Managing Director of Bradt Travel Guides. Let's start with you, if we can, Geoff Hann. Do you think this advice from the British government was necessary?
Yes, I do, because we have to admit that this was a terrible incident, and we have to think about this seriously. And the people who are going there are going purely for a pure holiday on the beach. So it's different from adventure type of travel that we do. So I think, and obviously the Foreign Office has worked very hard on this, and we support them on it, really.
So you're dividing the two classifications of holiday, are you? You're saying if you go for a beach holiday, that's one thing. If you go on an adventure holiday, then you are, if you like, buying into the sort of risks you might encounter in Iran or Afghanistan or Iraq, which is what you do.
Yes, yes, certainly. As long as you advise people, as long as they know what they're going to into, and they've assessed the risks themselves, it's a different matter altogether.
Adrian Phillips, do you think the advice is appropriate?
I think in this instance it is. I would agree with Geoff in that. I think talking to people within the industry, though, there's a general sense that the FCO can be a little overcautious in its advice, that it can impose travel advisories sometimes too quickly or with too blunt an edge, and then perhaps even more importantly, take too long to withdraw them. There was an example in Madagascar, for instance, at the end of 2013. There were some muggings there at the end of the year in 2 national parks in the north. The FCO imposed an advisory against travel there to those parks, and because those were the 2 kind of main places for tourism, it pretty much killed tourism to the whole of the north of the country, and then they took many months to withdraw it, even after the culprits were caught. So there's a slight worry about the way in which they manage this advice.
Let's just have a look now at the map of the world, which is the places where the Foreign Office are now advising it's best not to go. And you can see from our hotspot map, when it materialises here, you'll see that there's increasing number of places. Tunisia's advice is essential travel only. We've got Turkey, another, I would have thought, summer high threat of terrorism, but the whole of Turkey, I mean, that's an interesting question. Egypt, I suppose we would know about, but again, do the holiday resorts, are they much safer than perhaps elsewhere? We had the problem in Cairo today at the Italian embassy. In Morocco, Marrakesh, a general threat of terrorism. Let's just let this sequence finish. But this is a very broad brushstroke, what you're saying, Adrian,
that's my exact point. I mean, the FCO understandably has to produce advice that's applicable to every Briton. The truth is that statistic doesn't apply to us as individuals. The chances of there being a terrorist attack, as in the UK, is very high. The chances of that attack hitting you or me individually is very much lower than that, which is why we don't all pack up bags and leave the UK because of the risk of terrorism here. I think in this instance, as I say, it's very raw, those events, and there's clearly some intelligence they have about the imminent threat in certain areas there. But as you say, the advisory goes across the whole of the country, and I very much hope that when more cultural and active adventure travellers are going over to Tunisia later in the year, that they don't prejudge their decision now about whether or not to travel.
Is that a problem, Geoff Hann, that this kind of blanket advice for an entire country doesn't really tell the whole story?
Yes, it's true. For example, in Afghanistan, there are areas there where you can travel in, but other areas you can't. And I always use my experience and the time to say to people, okay, if necessary, and we have to change, we change. We change our route, we change our schedules, change everything in the light of what happens. But it's also incumbent on us, for example, British travellers, not to interfere or get in the way of the British Army when they were there. So I think that's something that one has to take it bit by bit, country by country. It's all different.
Many of us might have been forgiven for thinking that Iraq is still a sort of no-go zone and you wouldn't choose to go there. Where do you take people to Iraq these days?
Well, in Iraq, we are under the Ministry of Tourism. They look after us, and we plan everything with them. And now we don't go anywhere north of Baghdad, for example. So we do Baghdad and the south down as far as Basra, visiting the ancient Sumerian sites. We don't have a problem with it at all, though the Iraqis there like to escort us everywhere, which is fair enough. In the end, you hardly notice them, which is not a good idea, but it's a fact. We haven't had any problems at all.
Adrian Phillips, in the Tunisia case, I suppose there will come a time. Would you anticipate when the advice can be withdrawn if there's no further problem?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the FCO have an extremely difficult job to do, balancing the different considerations they have. My great hope is that they will be quick and flexible in adapting their advice as they get a better picture of the threat, and that they take, as you say, you've pointed out that the advice covers the whole of the country, that they'll try, as that intelligence feeds through and time goes on, that they'll be slightly more nuanced in their approach to the advice to that destination.
In a sense, that makes this come away from the holiday resorts advice all the more extraordinary, because you thought that would be the one very well protected part
you would
of
think that,
Tunisia
although
right now.
I suppose the converse argument is that in a way the terrorists want to make the biggest impact they can make is by killing as many tourists as possible, and so in a way you're better going off the beaten track to places that are beyond these beach resorts, and spreading, you know, lessening your risk in that way. But you're right, the truth is that it's pretty, the statistics are more scary when they're given in a broad-brushed way than they actually probably are when you look at it on an individual level.
Okay, Adrian Phillips and Geoff Hann, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.